Okay, so just kind of as to repeat or to underline some of the points I've made in this series of podcasts, Hitler was ecstatic when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He had not really known about it. Um, he felt like his aides later reported he felt like a heavy burden had been lifted. Again, keep in mind this context that just 2 days before there had been this massive Russian counterattack in Moscow. And from Hitler's point of view, this was a miracle that the Japanese had bombed the US because it looked like the Germans were suffering this terrible defeat. And now suddenly Japan has come in and bombed the US. And Hitler just thought this was great news. He declared, "We simply can't lose the war now. We have a partner who has never been beaten in 3,000 years." I think in the earlier podcast, I think 1,000 years. But in reading this quote, it was 3,000 years. That Hitler's one of his aides called one of the Italian ambassador and was jumping with joy about the Japanese attack on the United States. He is so happy that I can only congratulate him, even though I'm not so sure about the advantage. In other words, the Italian ambassador is going, "Why are you so happy, Germany? This is going to really cause you problems." So Hitler wants to take what the Japanese had done, and remember, the Japanese are running wild in the first 6 months of World War II. As I said before, they take Indonesia. They've already captured Vietnam. They take the Philippines. They're in China. They take islands almost all the way to Australia. So Hitler feels like he has attached to himself to a winner. And as I've said many, many times before, that he underestimated the U.S. power and the U.S. capacity to fight both Japan and Germany simultaneously. So, from Hitler's point of view, declaring war on the United States, it was a freebie because he just didn't think the U.S. could do anything to him for years. And in that period of years, Hitler would capture the parts of the Soviet Union he wanted to capture, and he would be building the empire in Europe that he wanted to build, along with the industrial base. So he would be strong enough by the time the U.S. turned towards Europe, that he could easily defeat the U.S. And of course, he also believed that the U.S. was going to be mauled by Japan as well. And so it wasn't really going to be as strong as it would have been had Japan not attacked the United States. Another quote from Hitler, the East Asia conflict drops like a gift into our lap. Um, and so, from Hitler's point of view, the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor was a gift that was dropped into his lap. The U.S. wouldn't be able to intervene. And so, why not declare war on the U.S.? The other thing is that the Germans felt like the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Merchant Marines, they wouldn't be able to supply England and later the Soviet Union with any Lend-Lease goods because the full attention of its Navy and the full attention of its Merchant Marines, the ships with the goods would be in the Pacific, not in the Europe. Again, as I've said many times, underestimating the extraordinary industrial and military capacity of the United States during the 1940s. So on December 11th, 1941, Hitler goes in front of the Reichstag and declares war on the United States. He says that he has the strongest army in the world, the mightiest air force, and a proud navy. And that the U.S. And he declares war on the U.S. He sends an ambassador to Washington, declares war, and then publicly declares war. In the U.S. Congress, the isolationists who were anti-war were incredibly deflated. There was a senator from California. Now California is seen as very liberal, but in the 1940s it was quite conservative. A man by the name of Hiram Johnson, and he was one of the leading isolationists in the United States. And he, after Pearl Harbor, he was gearing up for a major fight against Roosevelt to declare war on Germany. And he was shocked when Hitler declared war on the United States. He confessed to his son in a letter, I did not think they would declare war, he wrote to his son. In fact, the day before, he had made objections to a force of U.S. Soldiers going into Europe, and that he felt like he had already votes in the Senate that would help him stop the U.S. sending any troops to Europe after Pearl Harbor, because again, it was the Japanese that had bombed us, not the Germans. So Hitler made this tremendous miscalculation. And the last thing I'll say is that what happened with Hitler's decision to declare war on the United States, it had a very, very profound impact on the Holocaust. As one historian has written, by December 1941, most European Jews were still alive. By the end of 1942, a little over a year later, most of them would be dead. So what you start seeing with the Holocaust is that Hitler had been holding Jews in Europe hostage in exchange for America's good behavior. Suddenly now it has no reason to do that after he declares war on the U.S. And what we have and what we see beginning in 1942, and you'll be reading about it this week, you see an acceleration of the Holocaust. You see an acceleration of the mass murder of Jews. There's no more talk about moving the Jewish community to Madagascar, or somehow, if the Soviet Union can be defeated, to move European Jews to Siberia. With the U.S. entry into the war, what you start to see is Hitler's move away from the Eisenstaatsgruppen, which is, as you should know by now, is the mass execution by bullets of Hitler's enemy in the Jewish community in the occupied territories, moving into the concentration camps that we think about often when we think about the Holocaust, Auschwitz, Treblinka, and the many other death camps. So with U.S. entry into the war, what happens is that Hitler accelerates and expands the murder of the Jewish community in the occupied territories that we hold. So this is one of the truly horrible outcomes of Hitler's monstrous regime during this period. But it nonetheless, the U.S. did have to go to war with Hitler. Jews were doomed whether the U.S. entered the war or not. It was just a question of timing. No, but we can actually point to the acceleration of the Holocaust beginning in early 1942 with the U.S. entry into the war. And so this is one of the things I want you to take from the course. I want you to have a better sense of how the Holocaust evolved. It would have happened in any event. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the question is, and what I want you to take from this course is the way it did happen and why it happened in the way it happened. The final outcome was predetermined. The only question is what would the process, what would the horrific process would be? And the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the entry of the U.S. into World War II really shaped the process of one of the worst events in the history of human beings.